All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective, and that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure-to-pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity, but to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy, or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
Principals now, at least in my experience, are required to be budgeting experts and logistical experts and facilities acquisition experts and all of these things that are, in my opinion, so far outside of the traditional scope of the role of a principal. And the majority of people who sit in that principal role didn't have all of these responsibilities in mind when they went through their admin credentialing program, right? Like they want to be with students and with educators and making this difference. And I think that although facilities and operations aid in making that difference, I just don't think that that's the expectation that most people have when they come into the role of principal.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
All right, everyone. My guest today is Colleen Mullen. Colleen is the founder and executive director of Propel, a charter management organization in California serving 10 different charter school clients, which represent over 30,000 students. Colleen shares more about her background at the beginning of the episode, so I won't steal her thunder, but she's a passionate leader, an entrepreneur, and we discuss what it was like founding the organization in 2019, navigating COVID, and ultimately growing a CMO that has a robust service offering and really a vision for significance over success, a distinction that Colleen highlights throughout the conversation. We also talk a little bit about the role of a CMO, some misconceptions, and a few ideas for thinking about a CMO if you're a school that's considering partnering with a management group. Hope you enjoy the show. Colleen, thanks so much for being here. I'm super excited for our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here as well.
Awesome. Well, I know you, but for the audience who doesn't know you and is not familiar with Propel, the organization that you run, I would love for you to kick things off with a quick version of the backstory, because I think you all have a unique position in serving really the oldest charter schools in California. And so I'd love for you to share maybe just a quick version of what Propel is and why it was founded back in 2019. It was, I guess, 5 years ago now.
Yeah. Wow, that's such a big question. So before I dive into that, I just did want to take a second and express my gratitude to you and the entire team at BYQ. I know that putting together a podcast, especially one that's been so impactful out of the gate, is no easy feat. And I just want to commend you for these efforts. And I can't wait to kind of just watch all of this continue to unfold. And so I just needed to take a second to put that out there and start off on that foot. But yeah,
well, thank you.
Of course. So yes, my name is Colleen, and I am the founder and the executive director of Propel. We're a charter management group. I have just over 10 years of experience in the charter school space, and an interesting slew of experience that's not relevant to this space from before that. And I don't know if I should get into a little bit about me too and Propel, but my undergraduate degree is in management. And by the time this podcast airs, I will likely have just completed graduate school and have earned my MBA from Pepperdine, with a focus in leadership and managing organizational change, which feels absolutely insane and exciting. And that obviously supports the work that we do at Propel. And Propel was developed in response to some massive legislative swings in the state of California. Back in, I believe it was 2018, Senate Bill 126 passed in our state, which essentially required charter schools to comply with the same transparency requirements that school districts in our state comply with. So things like Government Code 1090, Fair Political Practices Commission Form 700 filings, Public Records Act, the Brown Act, kind of all of those transparency requirements, which charter schools had not previously been required to comply with. Charter schools now were required to comply with them. So with the passing of that legislation, CMOs also became required to comply with those same transparency requirements. And based on the governance structure at that time for the schools that Propel now supports, which are options for youth and opportunities for learning, the network was unable to shift the structure that it currently had in place. And so this need developed, and I made the decision ultimately to capitalize on an opportunity to start this organization and continue to serve these charter schools, like you mentioned, that have been around since the charter school legislation passed in the state of California. So kind of all of that outlines why our organization was formed. But I think it's important to acknowledge that all of these formation efforts, like I said, were made specifically to support an existing network of schools that have previously been working with an incredibly comprehensive CMO. And so this very high bar existed. And early on, we did everything in our power to kind of meet that bar. And the last 5 years have just been a little bit crazy ever since then.
Definitely a unique origin story. And anytime you have to react in a short period of time to new legislation, it requires, grit and entrepreneurship and quick thinking. And certainly it seems like that was at the forefront of you deciding to found the organization. As you think about that origin story, like you mentioned, it's a little bit unique because you were supporting schools that had been around for a long time. Another management organization had been supporting them. How did that shape those first couple years? You kind of alluded to, we were trying to maintain a certain level of excellence that had been there. Like, how did you think about those first couple of years in supporting those two groups of schools you mentioned, options for youth and opportunities for learning?
Yeah, this is a really great question because it requires me to reflect on how far the organization has come in such a short amount of time. I think the situation that we were dealt in the very beginning truly shaped how I was required to operate the organization as a business, and then also how I intentionally led my team. Early on, I had to be pretty scrappy because me and my first 19 employees came from a very well-oiled machine with resources and experts and systems and processes. And then all of a sudden, we were disconnected from all of that. And so for the first year, mind you, was 2019, 2020. So it was the COVID year, which presented
a casual first year. Yeah.
Whole new set of opportunities for us to capitalize on. But for that first year, like I was HR, I was IT, I was tech support, I was payroll, I was accounting, I was all of the things. And I did it because I knew that supporting our school's success was Propel's purpose. And I could choose to lead by example and choose to do the hard work. And I knew that choice was necessary to model the type of leadership that I expected from my really young Propel team. So coming out of that haze, I started to realize that I had spent all my energy pouring into these schools who, they're our clients and they're our priority, but I had spent so little effort pouring into my own team. And so while we were formed with this purpose of supporting options for youth and opportunities for learning, if we wanted to stand on our own and establish independence as a CMO, we needed to expand to support school success more broadly. And that meant exploring growth as a group of leaders, which I would say started to really happen around year 3.5. And then with the start of year 4, we made a massive jump to 47 employees, and we just hired our 52nd a couple of weeks ago, which feels totally wild.
Yeah, that's quite the growth trajectory. I want to put a pin in the growth for a second, because I do want to come back to that, because 19 to, I think you said 52, that's a very big jump, almost a tripling in size. But I want to talk about the role of a management organization, because you mentioned there's sort of two sides to the coin, right? You have this primary focus on supporting these schools, but then like you said, there's also an internal responsibility to invest in your employees and in the capabilities of the management organization and in growth, so that you can have a bigger impact. And within the charter school community, management organizations take on different sizes, shapes, roles. People have different opinions about them, but certainly they serve a really important role in the community. Like, how do you think about what the primary mission of the organization is? And how do you all think about adding value to your partner schools?
So at the core of it all, right? Like if we just dig down and go down those like 7 layers of why and all of those things, Propel's primary mission is to care about people. I think that is always at the core of who we are and what we do. And we do that through supporting school success, which is, Propel's tagline, supporting school success. We do it in various ways so that all levels of stakeholders can benefit from the knowledge of our leadership team. So ultimately, I'm sure most of the audience knows this, but charter schools exist because the public education system was designed to serve the majority of students, which I totally understand because I think it's the utilitarian approach to solving the nation's education needs, the education problem. Fortunately, as society has continued to evolve, we realize that so many of the minority, those not being served well by the traditional public education system, offered so much to society as a whole that was left unrealized. So charter schools started in order to help those kind of underserved realize their full potential and give alternative paths to success, which is beautiful. That said, most charters don't have district style resources, albeit staffing and finances and facilities, knowledge, experience, the list goes on. And while it's reasonable for some charter schools to bring all of those things in-house, it's incredibly difficult for other smaller schools to do that. It's just, you can't support it or sustain it. I think that highlights the benefit of not only CMOs, but also various educational service providers who all ultimately provide access to economies of scale in a way that districts get to do for their schools or larger charter networks get to do for their schools. So I always say that Propel is a relationship business, and the value that we bring to any school that we serve is always going to be done through those relationships. From a business perspective, we offer a host of things. We offer enrollment and outreach, community engagement, attendance accounting, reporting, compliance, leadership development, operations management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of those services are provided through relationships that we invest in, right? And we can't be successful in any of those efforts unless we foster the relationship, because I think that's ultimately the key to be successful with those very tangible outcomes and those measurable, quantifiable outcomes. So at the end of the day, we work in a relational industry. We're a relational business, and a CMO should support a charter school in fostering those necessary relationships, which ultimately benefit the student experience. So I'm not even sure if I went off and answered your question or not, but I'm hoping that somewhere in there, there's an answer that's there.
No, I definitely think you did. And a couple of things that jumped out to me were the emphasis on relationships certainly seems to highlight the need for trust between a school and their management organization. You really stressed that without that personal relationship there, it might be hard for a school to really trust that all the litany of services that you just talked about can be effectively outsourced in a way that both organizations are, rowing in the same direction, feeling like they have one another's best interest. And I think you hit on a good point, which is there's so many people who are passionate about education in the charter school community, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily passionate about enrollment, marketing, analytics, or something like that, or the business side that's so critical and so necessary that, as you mentioned, in traditional districts gets subsumed by that district central office. As you think about the growth of Propel over the last 5 years since its inception, has there been other aspects of how you think about the value you're providing to the schools that you serve that have changed or evolved over that time? Because you kind of mentioned that first year or two was a little bit reactive where it was all hands on deck. How did you, as an organization, think about shifting from, okay, this is all hands on deck, the same person handles accounting and IT, et cetera, to, okay, now we're being proactive with our schools? Like, what was that transition like?
So I have two examples of ways that we expanded the services that we offer to our charter school partners, one being more reactionary and then one being proactive. And then I think I can talk about a little bit of the difference between those two kind of efforts or experiences that we have. So one of the ways that we evolved the services that we offer was in response to COVID. So the schools that we work with, we have 10 charter school clients. They serve, somewhere between 30 and 35,000 unique students a year. It's a big network of schools. And when the global pandemic hit, none of us knew what we were doing. How do we have these, massive drones of resources? And everybody's like, I don't know. We all put our hands up and we were like, ugh. So we decided to invest in the development of one of our employees to become kind of this health and wellness expert, right? And so it was like, drop what you're doing because it's not as important as it used to be. This is a priority. I want you to learn everything there is to know about COVID. And oh my goodness, the two of them were COVID experts, right? We called them the COVID queens, and they would come around and they would tell us all what we were supposed to do and what we weren't supposed to do and when we were complying and when we weren't, following all the rules. And, you can't have a shared birthday cake and all of the things that we weren't supposed to do. It was like, okay, these people know what we need to do. And since we're on this back half of COVID, that need has gone away, but the need for student health and student wellness and student well-being hasn't gone away. And so we were able to continue the effort of pouring into this, this leader to establish a department that was meeting an unmet need of our school clients. So that is the process of being reactive to something that the market kind of presented to us as an issue. And then, on the opposite side of that, would be an example of leadership development. We've always had leadership development and coaching as a part of one of the core functions of what we do. And for the schools that we serve, the principal position, there's an assistant principal position, and it's always important to make sure that leadership is present in the schools. And so we recognized that the leadership pipeline needed to be developed to be able to better respond to if a principal decides to capitalize on another opportunity or go elsewhere for employment. We needed to make sure that we had a bench of assistant principals who were prepared to step into that principal role and meet the needs of the school community. And so we developed a cohort about a year ago called Emerging Leaders, where we work with a group of anywhere between 15 and 20 to 25 assistant principals in the network, developing their leadership capabilities so that if an opportunity presents itself, they're prepared to step into that role. And then I think what's really great about that is you're investing in an individual. A lot of the times we get scared that, what if there's not an opportunity for them and they end up going somewhere else because now they have this really valuable skill set. That said, I think when we take that step and we invest in our team and them as individuals and professionals, they see a value in that as well. And they want to stay because they recognize that you're setting them up to create an impact in students' lives. So to go back to the question of how this has been able to evolve, how we've been able to move from this primarily reactionary group of leaders to proactive group of leaders, I think it was just how much we stretched ourselves early on and all of the lessons that we learned in those first couple of years. And then getting to the point where we could recognize, are we moving out of the urgent and into strategic? And recognizing how we can move out of the urgent phase and into the strategic phase. And that has been an effort from a leadership development internally at Propel so that we had the ability to kind of shift the mindset of our leaders and then the leaders in our school. I hope that made sense.
Totally makes sense. And I think that's a really unique observation because most of the time, school level leaders, anytime you talk about an operational challenge or even something like leadership development, the refrain, and it's totally valid, is we are constantly putting out fires. Like if you're a principal, everything is urgent. The upset parent that you need to call back after hours, the pipe that burst that is now shutting off one classroom and you're moving students to another part of the building. Like there are those urgent needs. And so being able to have a group like yours be thinking strategically for their long-term success. And I love the example of developing the bench of assistant principals, because if you're a principal, how often are you stopping to think, man, if I left, who would be what's my succession plan? And have I effectively trained that person to do everything that I do? That's just a challenging expectation to think that a principal is already doing that on top of all the other things. And so I think that's a really unique observation, that you all are recognizing that you can sit in the strategic seat and set those schools up for success and implement really impactful services that they may not be able to implement themselves. As you reflect on that, it seems like, going back to one of the two things you mentioned was the ability to react to the needs of the market. It seems like CMOs are uniquely positioned to do that in some ways, in that they sit outside of the classroom, so to speak. Do you think that there's a unique benefit, or I guess from your lens, how do you think about some of the capabilities that a CMO can bring to a school that they may not be able to do, just given the constraints of what goes on at the campus level?
Yeah, that's a great question. My primary experience is in the state of California, but I'm sure that these trends are happening across the nation. But the level of compliance expectations for charter schools is growing rapidly. And it seems like there is a slew of new responsibilities that we are required to comply with on an annual basis. And I think it's important that we as a CMO pay attention to that stuff, and CMOs in general, so that the principal can stay in their role as a principal and be effective in their role as principal and do what matters most to our ultimate stakeholder, the student. Principals now, at least in my experience, are required to be budgeting experts and logistical experts and facilities acquisition experts and all of these things that are, in my opinion, so far outside of the traditional scope of the role of a principal. And the majority of people who sit in that principal role didn't have all of these responsibilities in mind when they went through their admin credentialing program, right? Like
Right.
want to be with students and with educators and making this difference. And I think that although facilities and operations aid in making that difference, I just don't think that that's the expectation that most people have when they come into the role of principal. With that said, that's when a CMO can truly benefit our educational leaders on the ground. We can say, hey, you're required to do this. We've done it for you. Would you like us to go over it with you so you can at least have an idea of what's been done on your behalf? And then you can sign it and be on your way and feel confident that your time is best spent in the classroom, in the school, on the campus, connecting with educators, connecting with students. So you don't have to worry about kind of all of the bureaucracy that this industry requires of us.
Yeah, I think probably most principals followed the traditional path. They were teachers, and then they got on the admin track and it ended up as APs and then principals. And to your point, then there's this laundry list of demands that, frankly, no one was trained on, and it becomes a trial by fire situation. And so talk about the benefits of a CMO being able to take on some of that administrative burden. Compliance is a great example. And if a school is, I guess to kind of think about it from the school leader's lens, because there's a lot of fantastic, single site charter schools that are doing all of this in-house, and it's really, really impressive. And so I guess maybe a question would be, if a school is considering seeking outside help, contracting with a management organization, turning to an organization like a Propel to, bolster their operations, to offload some of that administrative burden, what would you encourage them to ask or reflect on to know if it's a good fit? Because, going back to your original emphasis that it's all about the people, How should they think about evaluating that type of a relationship? How does a school even know if a management organization is going to be a true force multiplier for them?
I think that's a great question. And I think that a school leader, be it a principal or a board or at whatever level, when considering whether or not a relationship with a CMO is a good move for them, asking themselves the question, how is my time best spent to create the best possible outcome for students, is the first question that they should be asking themselves. And if they happen to be really good at compliance and compliance is like the thing that they love to do, then don't contract with a CMO for compliance because you've got it handled. But if your core personal purpose as an educational leader is to create and effectuate positive change in the classroom and to be present, and maybe you have experience as a coach and you love helping educators be better educators, and that's how you can create the biggest impact in your role as a school leader, then perhaps contracting with a CMO is a really good opportunity for you. And so I think that's ultimately step one of what a school leader should reflect on when considering whether or not a CMO is a good option for them. And then I think it goes back to determining what type of relationship you are looking for from a CMO. I think a CMO, or the term CMO, is so broad in this industry, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but a CMO can mean so many different things, governance-wise, service-wise, structure-wise, contractually. And so determining what a good CMO relationship would look like for your school, and then seeking out a CMO that can have that sort of relationship with you will ultimately, in my opinion, provide you with the best possible partnership to create the most positive change.
Really, really good advice, and really, really practical advice as well. In kind of bringing us to a close here, I wanted to ask a couple of more personal questions for you as a leader, if that's okay. And I wanted to start with, what are you excited about as you and your leadership team continue to build Propel? Like you mentioned, the tremendous growth you've had. You mentioned being able to add additional services and supports, alluding to continuing to support student mental health and wellness. Like what gets you excited about the next 5 years with Propel?
So one thing that I have always strived for individually is to create significance and not success. And I think, that kind of sits at the core of what we do alongside caring about people. And so with any growth opportunity that Propel takes advantage of or capitalizes on, the idea that we are creating a significant outcome for a group of people just gives me a lot of energy to keep this work going. And so I think your question was, what am I most excited about with the growth? And I think it comes back to creating like a significant impact for communities, be it students, educators, administrators, literal communities that these schools operate within. Whoever it is, if Propel and the work that we do can create a positive change, then I think we are, by definition, being successful. For me, that's what keeps me going and what makes me most excited about this work.
All right, one more personal question as a leader. Reflecting on the experiences that you've had leading the organization since 2019, what are maybe one or two things that come to mind for things you've learned as a leader along the way, things that you're personally trying to implement for yourself that might resonate with other leaders of management organizations or just school leaders in general?
I have one that comes to mind for me. And I think I always knew this, but my understanding of this has continued to evolve in these last 4.5 years since I started this organization. And that is, leading and managing are incredibly different disciplines. You can have one and fail miserably at the other. But out of the two, I would choose to be a leader every single time before I would prioritize my role as a manager. Managing well provides opportunities to achieve and to be successful, but leading provides opportunities to create significance. And I know I've said that word a lot throughout our time together, but my purpose in this organization is to create significance, not success. And so I hope to continue to develop my understanding of the juxtaposition between those two disciplines, managing and leading, and continue to evolve as a leader in the years to come.
Awesome. All right. So for other peers of yours, other CMO leaders, whatever CMO means, as we mentioned, that encompasses a whole litany of things. If they're curious to connect with you, learn more about Propel, if school leaders happen to be listening to this and they happen to be in California or wherever Propel offers services, doesn't have to be California, and they're curious to connect with you or learn more about Propel, where should they go? Where do you want to direct listeners?
Yeah. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. I think that's the best way to start a meaningful relationship with any potential educational partner, just because it's a lot more personal. And then Propel, we're currently in the process of doing a lot with our website and our social platforms. So instead of directing anybody to something that will likely be under construction by the time the podcast airs, I just think it would be better to just come to me and connect with me, as the executive director of this organization. We can chat about what your organization's mission and vision are and determine together if we would be good educational partners. Or if you are also, an employee of or a leader of a CMO, we can talk about what resources we can share with one another so that we can both create the optimum amount of significance in this space.
Very cool. All right. So go find Colleen on LinkedIn if you want to connect. You'll see the new awesome, pretty website in weeks or months from now. But for now, we will also link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes of the podcast. But Colleen, this was great. Super fun conversation. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@byq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.